Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, for having us. It's been a while since we talked PFAS last, about a year ago. There's a lot that the department has done to test our water systems across the state to get a better idea of what levels of PFAS and PFOA are in our drinking water supply. And we've been working very, very hard and diligently to analyze that and make it available for you. The results of our testing we did provide for you. The levels that we've, yes, there should also be a that document if you'd like to look at specific water systems. And to my right, I have Seema Dixit, who is our Chief of Healthy Homes and Environment and Environmental Health, which is responsible oversees drinking water quality in the state. And Dr. Michael Burns, who is the toxicologist for the state. So Seema's going to give you kind of just a background on what we've done in this past year that might answer a lot of your questions, and then if you have any technical questions regarding health-related effects of PFAS, PFOA, or kind of where the levels are across the state, we can answer those questions for you. So kick it over to Seema. And then after us, we're just speaking from the drinking water standards and our regulatory authority. Terry Gray from DEM is going to come up after us to talk about surface water protection.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Neil. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you so much for this opportunity. So the Rhode Island Department of Health has been busy over the last 3 years. We did our first round of sampling in 2017, some of the results of which and findings were presented almost a year ago here. We continued with our second round of sampling in 2019. Between these 2 rounds of testing and sampling, we've tested in the state 100% of large public water systems serving more than 10,000 people, which is how we define the large public water system, 100% of the schools statewide, and 49% of all community water systems. So this was the sampling effort done with a viewpoint to cover majority of the state and large number of populations. This testing included 87 water systems and water consumed by 87% of the state's population. The results, the details of which per town and water system have been given to you. Overall, our results between the sampling, as a result of which were 44% of the water systems had detection of at least one PFAS compound. One water system had the PFOA, PFAS greater than 70 parts per trillion, which is the current EPA advisory. 12 water systems had at least one sample of the 6 PFAS compounds greater than 20 parts per trillion, which has been the number we've been discussing. 9 schools and 1 preschool had PFAS, again, the weighted average of the 6 compounds greater than 4 parts per trillion. And 13 water systems had PFAS greater than 20 ppt parts per trillion combined for the 5 compounds. So the details are in the packet that you'll receive. In addition to that, in the period of last 2 to 3 years, the Department of Health has met with a variety of stakeholders. We have attended regional and national meetings and have held a series of peer discussions with everyone around the country, because New England is indeed leading the country with developing these standards. Additionally, we've been working with the Rhode Island AG's office, with the Department of Environmental Management, and stakeholders. We also convened a technical advisory committee last June that has met 4 times so far, and the technical advisory committee has experts from ecoRI, from Brown. It has a few representatives from the industry. We also have the water systems. We have the Water Resource Board, Department of Environmental Management, and our state lab and Department of Health experts who serve on this expert advisory committee that has met 4 times so far. We are now at a juncture of finalizing all our analysis through both of these sampling efforts, as to have a clearer picture of the PFAS exposure in the state. The outcome of this assessment is also being compared with what this means in terms of the health risks as is known so far in the science to the populations that are being affected by these water systems. as has been mentioned previously, PFAS is an evolving science, and we almost have data coming out every day on the health effects, the health risks, and the varied levels of the varied compounds. So far, one thing is universally known, and everybody accepts is it's called as a forever chemical because it stays. However, the science is evolving as we speak, and there is no national advisory. So based on all the assessment that we have done and the health risks that we have done with the help of Dr. Michael Burns, we have also completed recently entire study of the engineering options and the capital and operating costs should we be proposing regulatory MCL for PFAS in the state of Rhode Island. The idea behind this was we had one system in 2017 that exceeded 70 parts per trillion that was discontinued and was reconnected to re-engineered and connected to another system. We have the cost for that because that was completed in 2019 summer. That whole project would serve 35 connections, that water system. So based on that, we hired a consultant who has given us a thorough research of all the water systems, what the capital costs would be, what the operating costs would be. And the reason for doing this was we are required, before we regulate any chemical in water in the state of Rhode Island, we are required to present a cost-benefit analysis. So our idea was, we know where PFAS is in the state of Rhode Island, we know which chemicals we are going to work with, we know the health risks associated with different levels, and now we have the engineering capital costs and the operating costs. And together, based on all of that, the data that we have collected and worked on in the last few months, we are planning to make a recommendation for what we believe would be the ideal value for regulating PFAS in the state of Rhode Island. Currently, our timeline is to propose to the governor's office at some point early to mid-March with a recommendation, which will be followed by regulations. So that's a very tight timeline that we've been working on for the last 4 or 5 months. And it has been an interesting and exciting process only because our neighboring state, Massachusetts, is still working on their, they have announced 20 as their regulatory standard for PFAS. Connecticut had started working on their MCL regulation but has stalled the process. Vermont currently is at 20. And New Hampshire has had an injunction in the process, is my understanding, a few months back. So there is a lot of evolving science nationally. Our neighboring states have also been involved in discussions with us. We do know that we've done quite a bit of thorough work in terms of health risks as well as costs. So my hope and goal is that we will have a lot of lessons for other states to take from us when we are ready in March.
We're going to try to go through the 3 witnesses, then you can ask your questions, okay? Go ahead.
I don't have prepared testimony. I'm mostly here to answer questions.
Oh, there you go. Representative Bell.
Thank you. Doctor, so your draft regulations will be ready by when?
I think I'm on, yeah. We are hoping to make a recommendation in March, and we are hoping to complete our first draft of regulations by May. That is our timeline.
Will you commit to a date?
I think we should be able to do it by May 2020.
Your Department of Health, right?
Yes.
So my question for you is, can the Department of Health commit to a date-specific time when the draft regulations will be available?
Yes, Department of Health can commit to May 15, 2020 for draft regulations.
Okay. Because in your letter you say by the end of the first quarter. So is it by the end of the first quarter?
Yes.
Or is it, please let me finish my question, or is it May 15th?
We should have a first draft ready, but I'm hesitant to commit because we've had delays with engineering costs, not because of us, but because of engineering costs, which is why I'm hesitant to say we will be ready by March. We may be before May, but I can commit right. I don't want to have more delays and give a wrong date.
Is it fair to say then that the prediction for regulations, final regulations by the end of summer 2020 is more aspirational than set in stone?
I think we are pretty much on the timeline when I say May, and we should be ready. So I believe we should have the final regulations by May.
So in your testimony just now, the one thing I didn't hear is whether or not the Department of Health supports the bill or doesn't support the bill.
Sure, we're open to legislation that would set a standard. We'd like to go through the regulatory process and receive feedback there's a lot of work that our department has done to demonstrate cost-benefit analysis that's required of us that we would like to make open to the public and receive feedback on. To Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy's point, there will be a fiscal impact to ratepayers that will have to be made public and discussed with the community. We are open to generally legislation and look forward to working with the sponsors if it's needed. Where we are with legislation versus regulation, we're doing everything within our authority right now to regulate this. Other states that have regulated this, such as New Hampshire, haven't put in a lot of the cost-benefit analysis that we have and are subsequently being challenged. So we think it's important to really dive into all the science that we have, and be on a sure footing to regulate before we set a standard.
Well, I get all that, and I'm all for cost-benefit analysis because that's part of that's best practices when you're making regulations, for sure. I guess my question is, today we have a bill before us which would set a standard and it would create a fairly intricate monitoring and reporting system. And it appears that if you guys can hold to your 2020 dates, that your regulatory process is somewhat ahead of the bill. So I guess the question is...
I think there are some technical issues with the bill and how it lines up with our process that we want to address for both kind of who's responsible for regulating drinking water and groundwater that don't line up. I think generally the concept of setting a standard is something we're very open to. It's just mirroring all the work we've put in with regulations versus being too prescriptive in legislation.
So here's my question. This is my last question, Mr. Chairman. What could we do in legislation that would help you accelerate your timetable to get the regs out so that we can get our arms around this problem? Because what I'm hearing a lot of is, I don't doubt the good faith of the Department of Health, but I'm hearing that it's proceeding at an administrative pace that maybe is not fast enough for some of us. So science being science, right? You can't rush it, I get that. But is there something we can do, like perhaps set a statutory standard in our law that would help you move along the regulatory process? 20 parts sounds about, maybe in the ballpark, maybe a little bit less.
Yeah.
So I feel like right now RIDO has been working pretty much as fast as we can with the resources available. Like when New Hampshire tried to go forward with theirs, they allocated money for people to work full time on this. And so we've been moving for the last year about as fast as it's pretty much possible for us to go. I do feel like there isn't that much time left. We're getting really close to the finish line on these regulations, and I think, hopefully we will be there regardless of what happens.
And to Mike's point, where we set a regulatory standard, there's going to be certain resources that are going to be needed to bring different water systems up to compliance, and from our perspective as a department, to make sure that's enforced and implemented. I think, again, going through the regulatory process first to really weigh cost-benefit analysis and what resources are going to be needed both at the local water system level and with the Department of Health is an ongoing conversation.
Do you have a guess as to what the state level is yet?
No, we've been looking at many different levels of many different caps. 20, lower than 20, above 20. We're taking that back to our technical advisory group very shortly, I believe, to get their feedback as well. But really, there's each level comes with a different cost-benefit analysis. So when we do promulgate one, we will have to demonstrate kind of what different levels there are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have at least 3 questions right now. And I understand that we've heard these bills last year and I believe the year before. So trying to get your data that you had given, I only caught a couple of these. Did you say that we only tested 49% of the water systems in the state? I'm trying to catch, and I might be off a little bit, so please enlighten me on that.
So we went with what is a large water system, which serves more than 10,000 people. That was our first filter to say this is how we start, so that we get the most bang for our buck with sampling.
Okay.
So we said through our both rounds of sampling, we've tested a total of 87 water systems, and which also totals to 87% of water consumed of the state's population. So the water that's consumed by 87% of state's population has been tested by the Department of Health through its 2 rounds of sampling. Additionally, we've also sampled about 100 private wells that were found in the vicinity of the places where PFAS was detected, in addition to the water systems.
So the 100 wells that you tested, that was private, are they private individuals, private companies, or which, I mean, I'm trying to, I know that we had an issue years ago where gasoline had infiltrated in the Bowerville area into the water system and totally contaminated. They can't use it ever again. So
it was a combination of private homeowners with private wells,
okay.
as well as private wells that serve more than one family.
Next question. Mr. Hyman, I think you testified that you were going as far as with your jurisdiction could. If it's not your jurisdiction, or the Department of Health's jurisdiction, I should say, is it the federal government's jurisdiction? Is it another department within the state's jurisdiction? Where are we going?
Yeah, so we regulate on behalf of the EPA, I think, over 80 different chemicals. There's no EPA action level right now. Well, there is the 70 action level right now. But as we're going below that, I think that's up to each state's regulatory authority. What I was mentioning, the process that we're going through right now to demonstrate cost-benefit analysis before we issue a regulation is state law for all agencies. So that's something that all state agencies have to do before issuing regulations that would affect.
Okay, so all of this is under the DOH's jurisdiction and not like DEM or
So drinking water, we regulate drinking water. Surface water, groundwater are regulated by DEM, and Terry will talk about that process after us.
But my next question is going to be follow up on that one is DEM and DOH working together to solve this problem?
Yes.
Are you doing individuals? Are you replicating what you're doing? How is the process working?
Yes.
Sure. So DEM and Department of Health have been working together and have been in communication with what our standard is going to be. They're a part of the advisory committee as well. We've talked about once we decide on what our standard will be, they will be working towards adopting the standard for the surface and groundwater as well. But they're fully aware of where we are looking at what our sampling has been and what standards and costs will be.
A comment on that question was, I'm certainly glad and finally we're having a couple of departments working together because I've been working on some bills for years and we have finger pointing. It's on my jurisdiction, it's this one's jurisdiction. Well, work together. It's the state. Come on now. All right, the last question I have is your meetings. I haven't heard anything about any of the meetings. I don't know, are you advertising? Are they open meetings? Can anybody come and sit in on these meetings? Are we getting public feedback now, or are we waiting to get public feedback after you set the groundwork down?
The meetings were set up as advisory committee meetings with technical experts and some stakeholders and folks who would be interested, such as the water systems, representing the different water systems that we have. We have a few large ones as well. So they were meetings set up with the idea of understanding, in the absence of a national standard, what should Rhode Island be doing based on the data that we have collected so far, knowing that the advisory committee would also have their own information and make a very neutral determination of should we wait for EPA, should we proceed ahead, and if we should, then what should be the next step. So that's how the process has started. Once we make a determination of what our recommended regulatory standard will be, it will be open for public comment as well as review.
So these were closed meetings?
Yes,
Public
not
meetings.
necessarily deliberately closed, but they had yet invited and convened a group of stakeholders together. So that has happened in the past 6 months.
Yeah, well, we had the drinking water there more for the technical advice in terms of understanding the water systems, how they work, and what sort of technologies. So it wasn't necessarily because they were stakeholders and they were affected, it was more for their technical advice.
That's right, yeah.
Just say in general, all of our programs that work on different things very often have meetings with academia, different stakeholders, when we're considering regulatory change. The open and public process, I think, is the regulatory process once we've decided on our internal recommendations, to get feedback from other stakeholders as well. And there's the ability to amend regulations after that. Actually, we're required to respond to regulatory options before we do regulate. So there will be a very open and robust, and I'm sure a long process to receive public feedback.
I'm just concerned because we did hear these bills last year, and some of the people that have testified in years past, knowing that this bill was coming up, we had spoken to them, and my concern was that they weren't allowed even to go into the room to listen to the testimony, to try and absorb what's going on there to set the groundwork, as you've stated. This should be a totally open process from the time we started till the time we get the regulations in place. So I'm just concerned that you have excluded certain people that wanted to have input, wanted to attend the meetings.
And part of that was we were working very hard to collect the kind of data that we would need over the past year to set the groundwork for these kind of discussions, testing all across different water systems. And also, every day, folks before me have said every day there's more science coming. So where we are when we issue regulations may change based on the emerging science, and we look forward to hearing public feedback from everybody if something new comes to light.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ted Kennedy.
Thank you. When I read the bill, I notice that it becomes effective upon passage. Obviously, for those community water systems that are currently not able to meet those standards, the last thing I want to see them is fined almost from the very start because of the fact that we're setting a date upon passage. Normally, we set a date in the future when we're trying to set a standard such as this. And obviously, as the Department of Health, in your rules and regulations, not only would you have to have your regulations set up, they'd have to be ready to go on the day that this passed, most likely, because of the fact that you're already making the water systems in the state comply with those standards. So, I think that's one thing that the sponsors may have to look at, is setting a date, if it's January 1st, 2021, to give those water systems the ability to somehow meet the necessary requirements. I was looking at the Westerly water system. I saw they made very good progress. 2018, they were very high. 2019, the numbers came down. They still have a ways to go, but it still was very, very good progress. I looked at another one in my district, the Bethel Village, and the number is just barely registered. So, the levels are so low in that particular water district. So that's one thing I don't know if the Department of Health, in working on this, if you're setting, a realistic timetable as far as when the water system should be in compliance with that.
One point of clarification is in terms of what would happen initially when this bill would go into effect. It would start testing, and so a system wouldn't be in violation until they had been above the standard for the average of 4, I believe. I forget exactly how it's set up in the bill. As we're trying to move forward with regulations, one of the big issues we're looking at is how to roll them out. Because one of the problems Vermont encountered when they had their legislature essentially dictate was just having everyone trying to test at once. And smaller systems like apartment complexes that didn't have it in their budget to start testing right away. And so that is definitely something we're looking at. For the larger systems, starting testing right away shouldn't be a big issue, but for like a school or some of the smaller ones, it's definitely, we're looking at probably, depending on how sensitive it needs to be, it's going to be between $300 and $800 per sample, so at least 4 a year. And so that isn't a lot for the big systems, but can be a lot for the smaller systems.
So a school might have to start budgeting a new line item every single year for a quarterly test to make sure that it complies on something like that.
As we're preparing for this, we are also trying to understand we have the cost for startup and then startup capital and operating. So we are looking creatively at different ways of engineering firms around the state who have expertise, what we could offer to the water systems as we try to regulate this. If there could be a more economic way of handling all the water systems to assess what their startup costs would be and do that assessment and planning and design. So what would be, because we just don't want to land with these huge costs right away, which will be the case anyway, but what could we do to make sure they're in compliance and still and lessen the burden in a way?
Yep. We did receive a communication from Providence Water Supply that seemed to indicate that they feel pretty confident that their system is not dealing with this because of the fact that the large watershed areas that they have. And I know Westerly has some watershed areas as well. At the same time, I know that the Bay Commission is looking at their combined overflow project that is going to be going on, and that's going to involve some rate hikes for those ratepayers for that particular system. And obviously that the NBC system does go into some of the other communities that may not get Providence water. So, obviously there could be a fiscal impact on ratepayers, not only for the NBC project, but then also for the water project. In order for, take the town of Westerly, for them to address this problem, do you expect that it would involve the purchase of a different type of treatment system?
Yeah.
Or are they going to just get a whole bunch of brittle water filters and put it through that?
The answer is actually kind of both, because what they do is a thing called granular activated carbon, which is similar to a Brita filter, but it's in a big giant vat essentially. And so they would have to install that. In the case of Westerly, it's going to, or North Kingstown and some of them, it's going to be more expensive because they have several wells in different places, and so they'll have to install treatment at each place where there's potentially. So we are getting an idea of what the cost for that would be, but I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head for, say, Westerly. So it's going to be a little more, though, for Westerly than some of the others where it's just one stream coming in, and so they only have to control it at one site. But it's kind of complicated when you get down into that, and that's why we have a very thick report that we just got, and now we're going through to understand the costs and along with it.
So the reverse osmosis water system that I saw on sale this weekend on QVC, should I buy it?
It will work for this, but it's overkill. Like the bread is, yeah.
Question from,
I'm sorry, I forgot one question, and I'm the one that's been asking people to keep it short, and I'm asking too many questions, I apologize. but there's just so many things that we need to delve into here. Just looking at and I'm looking at the community that I represent, and I see that we're well below the 20 parts per trillion on all of them. And the question is, how many total PFASs did you test for, and did you test for all of them across the whole 87% of the systems that you, or 87 systems that you tested?
Don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I believe we tested for at least 13 at all of them, but I think, so the EPA updated their method between the first round and the second round, and I think we had 13 the first time and 16 the second. I don't have the numbers right, but
16 is right. 16 chemicals, 16 different kinds. And in 2017, it was 13 chemicals.
So
Yeah.
13 different ones the first round, 15 or 16 the second round, so you added different PFASs
Yeah.
to
The second
the
round.
testing system. Okay, very good, thank you.